beautiful Guyana with wonderful people all over this country. She is a beautiful
Guyana will become the next Dubai, and we, the citizens of Guyana, are super excited to benefit from our homeland the same way the citizens of Dubai benefit from theirs.
This is what life is like for citizens from the
Guyana will become the next Dubai.
with wonderful people all over this country. She is a beautiful.
Okay, good night everyone, and welcome to our program here, another one of our program here at Globespan 24/7. My name is Neermala Ramsaywack, and I will be your co-moderator for tonight. Our program here at Globespan 24/7 aims to help make Guyana better, and our topics tonight are crime and cost of living and housing. I would like to welcome our guest for tonight's program, who is none other than Mr. Timothy Jonas, General Secretary of ANO, Marketing Specialist Tracey and New York City Council candidate Mr. Rusat Ramgopal. Now, before we begin, Mr. Ramgopal, who is also our co-moderator for tonight, is running for New York City Council's 20th district, and we here at Globespan 24/7 would like to congratulate and wish good luck to Mr. Ramgopal. Mr. Ramgopal, before we begin, for the people who don't, you're welcome. For the people who don't know, Mr. Ramgopal, before we begin, can you share a little bit about your campaign?
Yes, so I'm running in New York for New York City Council, District 28. So right now in 2023 in the fall there will be elections for New York City Council. District 28 is where a lot of the Guyanese diaspora is in Queens. That's where a chunk of Little Guyana is. It's basically from 100th Street up until about where Guyana Boulevard is. That's like in the 160s, and it's from Liberty Avenue on one end to the Belt Parkway on the other. So a lot of the audience who may be in New York will be familiar with that area of Queens and maybe living in it themselves. It's an area where it's been represented by Democrats for a long time. I'm running as a Republican because I think it's time to try something new in that area. The local Democrats have largely left the community behind, and the definition of insanity is trying the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. That's why I'm taking the chance now to try something new for the area. I'm young. I want to bring a fresh perspective and represent a new generation. I think that Guyanese have unfortunately not gotten the representation they deserve. Guyanese are the second largest immigrant group in Queens, but don't hold a single elected office in that area. They don't hold the city council seat. They don't hold the state assembly seat. They don't hold the state senate seat. They don't hold the congressional seat. And it's time for that to change. And it's incumbent upon us as a new generation to get that done. I mean, Guyanese are hardworking immigrants in this country, and unfortunately, they tend too often to be represented by the worst among them rather than the best among them. I see the history of other immigrant groups like the Irish and the Italians who came as hardworking immigrants to the city, and even though they at the beginning they were hardworking, but the mafia took over the stereotype of those groups. Over time, the children and grandchildren of Italian immigrants became people like Mario Cuomo and Rudy Giuliani. And I think that for Guyanese Americans, it's up to the children and grandchildren now to get stuff done and represent Guyanese Americans to the best of their ability. We're achieving great things, and it's time to do that in the political arena as well. And that's why I'm running for New York City Council in this area. We've been served terribly in terms of public service because the role of government is to serve the people. And in terms of, you look at the COVID pandemic, this area was the most infected, but among the least served. It was up to community activists to fill in the role and get things like masks and sanitizer and PPE for the people of that area, because the local government did not serve the people well. When it comes to other things like public schools, this is an area that's been left behind with failing public schools. And you have a secret tax in a sense, because the hardworking immigrant families now have to go and pay to send their kids to Catholic schools or other schools in order to attempt to get their kids a better education. They don't get the public schools that they deserve. When it comes to our seniors, we don't have proper senior care or proper healthcare facilities in the area as well. And that's why we need a voice in government to represent the interests of our community. That's why I'm running for our community. to represent all those interests, from the youth in terms of education to our elderly that need to be taken care of now, and the hardworking in middle age as well.
Now, thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I don't think the connection was the greatest. I couldn't hear when you were coming in or out.
Pardon me?
Yeah, no, I don't think the connection is the greatest, so I couldn't hear when you were coming in, so I didn't know when to stop.
Oh, that okay. That's okay. That's okay. Thank you for sharing with us here. And now we will begin our to dive into our topic, which is the crime. Recently there was an accident, a horrific accident that occurred on the Greenwich Park Public Road on the East Bank Essequibo, which claimed the life of 5 persons. Um, the accident involved a minibus and a lorry. Some people would call it a truck. And I mean, it was a terrible accident. Many people were injured in that accident, and 5 people died. Now it's clear that we have some people would call us speed demons on the road, because almost every day we are reporting a fatal accident in Guyana, and the numbers of death is continuing to increase almost every day as well. So what I would like to ask Ms. Jonas, I will begin with you. What do you think can be done to by the authorities to reduce the amount of accident that is happening on the road in Guyana?
I think you might be surprised by my answer. Actually, I have a very unconventional view. In Ghana, we have this tendency. I think it's born of our past slave days, that if we make a rule and someone doesn't obey the rule, then we make the penalty harsher. So we like to make a harsh penalty. We think that somehow that solves the problem. But that, in fact, isn't the case. View of history will show us that at the time when in Britain they were hanging 14-year-olds for stealing 2 loaves of bread back in the late 1700s and transporting 12-year-olds to Australia for stealing 1 loaf of bread, crime was at its highest, and folk who were considered well-to-do couldn't walk on the streets of London. So there is no correlation between harsh penalties and reduced crime. That is proven. And we have to get out of that mindset as Guyanese that, oh no, they're terrible people driving dangerously on the road, so instead of 5 years in jail, we have to give them 10 years in jail. That doesn't try to analyze the reason behind our horrific traffic situation. And the only way to solve the traffic situation is to analyze and see why it's happening. Now, there are a number of reasons I feel that we have such bad traffic records. First of all, you got to remember nobody sets out from his house in the morning to knock somebody else down or kill them. But why does it happen? Why are we such bad drivers? And for me, the first reason we're such bad drivers is that we have an unfair system of traffic laws. Now, if we had a clearly defined, fair system of traffic laws that the ordinary people, the ordinary drivers like me, would be happy to obey, what happens in a fair system is that the law helps the society identify a standard of behavior which is acceptable. And when there is a standard of behavior that is acceptable, that everybody recognizes this is the ideal, this is how we should be driving, the majority will conform to that, and the few who do not conform are easily identifiable and can be dealt with. But because in Guyana the road system is unfair, nobody obeys the laws. And therefore, there's no standardization of what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. I'll tell you what I'm talking about. There are places where we have 4-lane highways, and the speed limit is 50 kilometers an hour. Now, that is utterly ridiculous by any stretch of the imagination. So nobody is going to drive at 50 kilometers an hour on a 4-lane highway. I don't, so I speed. As soon as you have a situation where the majority of drivers are willing to ignore the law because the law is stupid, you don't have a standard anymore. And if there's no standard of right and wrong, then you do not have any criterion by which to judge the people who are driving at such a fast rate of speed that they are actually driving dangerously. So, I can be driving down Carifesta Avenue at 70 kilometers an hour and I'm driving very safely, never been in an accident. I'm not the person who will cause the accident, but its speed limits in Carifest Avenue is 50 kilometers an hour. The people who cause the accidents are the people who are driving at 120, 130 km. But they can't be identified and segregated because all of us are in contravention of the unfair law. And we're all in contravention because the law is unfair. If we had a standard that everyone recognizes fair, that's the first thing we need. The second thing we need is to be able to say that our leaders are also obeying the laws. And we can't say that. So the other day I was in town, rush hour, driving home from work, and the gate of the very compound opened, and a senior police officer came out and flashed his lights and drove up the wrong side of the road to the stop sign where there's a police traffic officer directing traffic, who changed the whole traffic thing so that this senior officer could continue driving without stopping. If we have a culture of ignoring the rules, we will continue to have serious accidents happening on the roads. And I believe that our first approach has to be to make the laws fair so that the majority of people are happy to obey the laws. The second has to be to identify rules that reduce things that cause road rage. For example, congestion on the roads. We have sand trucks and container trucks and building trucks and welding trucks and all kinds of trucks loading and unloading and blocking the road and stopping during rush hour at all hours of the day. It will be an idea to set timelines at night and not at rush hours when certain vehicles are allowed to be on the road. We have horse and carts, donkey carts in the middle of the city blocking traffic. That needs to come to an end. We have all and sundry using sirens and flashing lights to make us ordinary folk come off the road so that they can get by without waiting. Diplomatic vehicles, every four-wheel drive Land Cruiser in this country appears to have flashing lights and a siren, whether they're entitled to it or not. Now, that shouldn't be the case. The police, the fire trucks, the ambulances should only be using that facility when there's an emergency, not when it's convenient to them. If we can reduce the aspects of road use which cause frustration, and if we can set rules which are fair that everybody's happy to observe, I think we will see most people driving in conformity with the rules and less accidents. But as long as the laws are unfair and our supposed leaders are driving ignoring every convention, and this traffic system is not designed to reduce congestion and to permit smooth flow of traffic, there will be road rage, there will be frustration and impatience, and there will be no standard. So you will have all kinds of madness on the road, which is what we see.
Thank you, Mr. Jonas, for that comment. Tracy, what would you like to add to that?
Well, I must disagree with Mr. Jonas. One of his points, he said he doesn't believe to an extent or probably entirely that stiffer penalties will deter people from or will encourage them to be more responsible. And I believe personally that stiffer penalties will deter these drivers from consuming alcohol to the point that they can't focus and they're driving along the road because they know they're going to get a slap on the wrist and they can go. Stiffer penalties need to be enforced. I can speak from a personal perspective as well. I lost my nephew and his mother about 8 years ago to the most horrific accident in Berbice where 12 people died. And for years, as a journalist, it was something that I couldn't even cover, for obvious reasons. And what was more hurtful was the fact that the driver was parading along freely when he killed 12 people because of his because of how irresponsible he was, and the fact that he showed absolutely no remorse. So stiffer penalties need to be enforced for these drivers. They don't need to get a slap on the wrist and they're gonna go back and forth to court and then the matter is gonna get thrown out. Because when people lose their loved ones, they need justice, they need closure. And I speak from a very, very personal perspective on this. As against you're seeing a man walking and parading, has absolutely no remorse for what he did. And then, after that accident, it took me about 6 years before I could have pursued justice for myself, for my entire family, and for 11 other families. There were hundreds of people who were affected by this. And we had to literally beg for justice. And that gave closure. So the fact that this man is being punished for being irresponsible, showing absolutely no remorse, it gave us closure as well. So it's not just about, I know this doesn't apply to everyone, and Mr. Jonas said it, no one is going to, well, I shouldn't say no one, because if you're going to consume so much alcohol that you cannot focus on the road, then what are you telling me? Aren't you telling me that you're irresponsible? What are you expecting? You're not showing responsibility for the other people or respect for the other lives on the road, and you show no respect for yourself. So there are people like Mr. Jones, like myself, who are going to go out on the road, get in our cars, drive, and we're not sitting and trying to cause an accident with anyone, but there are a lot of irresponsible people. You're going to consume alcohol, you're going to be driving down the road, you're irresponsible. And again, I say it maybe, a little biased because we're still affected by this. This was a 2-month-old baby that died, along with his mother and so many other people. So many girls are motherless and fatherless. And I see that so many times when these accidents are committed. And I feel like these things need to be considered because breadwinners, one of the victims of that accident, he died. He was the breadwinner of his home. His son could not go to school, had to go with his mother in the back dam to catch fish to provide for themselves. So what happens to those people? You give the driver, and even though this driver killed 12 people, he got a slap on the wrist. He got 6 years. So stiffer penalties is one of the things that I would encourage, and I think it would deter people, because here in America, specifically in New York, people get stiffer penalties, and I think that's one of the contributing factors for people not being as irresponsible or accidents not being as high when compared to Guyana. And New York is far bigger state with millions of people as against Guyana with less than 1 million.
I'm very sorry to hear about your family's loss. If I was to add some to the discussion, I would say we have a lot of comments coming in, and I'm curious how Mr. Jonas or Ms. Khan would respond to some of the suggestions that we have in the comment section. So we have Joey Rick said it's simple. People need to take proper driving classes and road tests. Speed limits. Is speed limit cameras at different locations? Rajendra Singh said the trucks have a free pass to abuse the traffic laws. The minibus drivers are the same. Joey Rick also added that roadside drivers are also one of the main reasons we are having trouble on our roads. And Clement Singh just now added, I think in response to Ms. Khan, he said something about deterrence. But the comment it's not showing up again now. But if you guys want to respond to any of those points.
I would say, indeed, a lot of I personally know of situations where people are still paying to get their license. They don't have to take the test, or they don't have to do the actual practical. You can pay someone and you can get your license. And so obviously these are not people who have any experience and they're going on the road. So that's another thing that, they need to look into the corruption that's happening in the traffic department and the traffic unit of the Guyana Police Force, to ensure that when a person is given a license to go on the road, that is done so legitimately. And I know they won't be able to do that with every situation, but that is also a contributing factor to all of these accidents. A lot of inexperienced drivers, because people can pay to get their license. And to the comment where these huge trucks, they do take advantage of a small car and bombard other drivers as well.
Mr. Jonas?
Ms. Khan, I'm sorry to hear about your own personal tragedy. And it's hard to get over that sometimes. And you really do have my sympathy. That kind of shock is not something that just passes. You introduced one area that I'm in agreement with you on, which is drinking. Now, the use of drugs or alcohol before you drive is a deliberate and knowing act. And where that is concerned, I fully support what you said, that the rules need to be very strict. Now, the rules are in fact very strict. The second time that someone is caught, they lose their license, I think, for life. And there is jail time involved. Now, for me, if someone has a problem with drugs or alcohol, that person shouldn't be on the road. They shouldn't be driving. So where someone is caught, let's say the second time, because that's what the rules suddenly get much more strict the second time, which makes sense because it suggests a pattern of behavior. Where you lose your license, so you're no longer able to go on the road to drive at all. Once that is enforced, problem solved. Problem solved. This person is no longer a threat. And I suggest that we have identified the problem, a deliberate or inherent problem that is medical, but also the solution that this person is no longer on the road. Now, the context that I was discussing, speeding and reckless driving, was not to say this thing is all right. It was to try to identify what causes it. And I don't want to conflate the general discussion about what causes people to drive in contravention of the rules of the road with alcohol and drug use, because I think we got to separate those two things. One is a medical or mental problem, and the other one is a problem of a culture of not obeying rules. And both of them need to be fixed, but we have to understand cause and effect in an attempt to resolve what is obviously a large problem. So if the accident occurs, and I wasn't clear from your explanation of your own experience, but if the accident occurs because of drug or alcohol use, that's a whole different game. If we are seeing accidents all over the place that don't involve drug and alcohol use. They involve a general reckless disregard for the rules of the road. And if the whole culture is that way, we got to ask why. And I've given the example that I truly believe applies in Guyana. That if you've got a 4-lane highway where you're saying to people, drive as if you're driving Miss Daisy at 50 kilometers an hour, nobody will obey. And then if nobody obeys, you have no standard. Because people will say, there is Jonas driving at 70, and there is somebody else at 80, and some minibus going at 120. Who's dangerous and who's not? If we can have a
So, Mr. Jonas, and I agree with you, but I feel too that we all, and this is not, I'm not saying you're doing that, but as a Guyanese, I know sometimes we see other people, they're doing wrong and we want to justify our wrongs. Oh, he's driving at 80, I could drive at 90. We need to be responsible, and that's something, this is not what I'm saying to you, but to our viewers, we need to be responsible for ourselves. If you see a man going off a cliff, you're going to drive off of the cliff with him too. So sometimes and I could, as a Guyanese, sometimes we justify our own wrongdoings by showing that, oh, he's doing worse than I am, or he's doing the same thing, so don't focus on me. We deflect and put it to another person. So I don't know.
I think the difference between what we're saying is the solution. So allow me to moderate and ask you, Ms. Khan, what do you see as a solution to stop the culture, which I think we all admit exists, that most people do not obey the rules of the road in Guyana? What would you do?
I would say, and this is from a very personal, obviously, perspective, that we need to be responsible for ourselves. I personally, I, as someone who has and my entire family have been affected by accidents, I am, and things can happen, but I take a lot of responsibility when I get behind the wheel for my life, because I value my life, and for every other life that I'm going to come into contact with. So I think it starts with our mindset, understanding that, listen, my life is valuable and everyone else's life is valuable, and I need to change that. Because I feel when people come to, like, they come to America, they go to Canada and other countries, they adapt so fast to the rules and regulation, but because of the our mindset back home, we take things and we take people and the laws, we take them for granted at home. I think putting speed cameras is also would also help. If they put cameras and you start sending tickets like they do here, send them in the mail to people. That would also help. I know that, you know, the human resource I is maybe a challenge, but I know they put a lot of police on the road as well to help deter. You made the point where now I've seen also that the government, they've put in place where, you know, if you're caught once, twice, there are penalties in place to take away your license, which is all
Can I,
commendable.
can I
But it's,
interrupt you 1 minute?
of
I'm
course,
sorry, let me just jump in. I've also driven in the States. And do you agree with me that on their 4-lane highways, we're not talking about the 6 lanes and the 8 lanes, the speed limit is usually about 65. So on their 4-lane highways, you're going at 65 miles an hour and you don't feel like you're dangerous. And in fact, you're not. Everybody else is doing, 50, 55, 60. Now compare that to 30 miles an hour, which is 50 kilometers. If you were to ask those same drivers on those same highways to drive at 30 miles an hour, I wonder how many of them would obey that rule.
I mean, I'm speaking honestly, not a lot of people. And this is for the highway though. Like I feel people,
And
they drive up
okay,
fast,
okay,
obviously
but
on
that's my
the
point. So if we can have a fair law that people are happy to obey, because I happily drove at 60 miles an hour in the US, I didn't
Mhm.
speed. If we had a law that people could obey, then most of us, you and me included, would be obeying the law. And therefore, it would be the minority who break the law. And then it's easier to enforce against the minority.
And that I agree with to an extent, but I feel like you give an inch, people take a mile too. So
Well, they're driving at 65 in the States, and I'm not driving at 30 in Guyana.
but I'm speaking like I would speak to Guyana. That is a decent speed to go at when you're on the highway. But I'm speaking to Guyana that if you give, you could go a certain mile per hour. I feel like they're definitely gonna go way over
I specifically said four-lane highway, though. I was quite specific.
the
I'm not
highway.
advocating that driving through Regent Street. Four-lane highways we're talking about.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I agree with that. I agree with that.
So I think that what I'm trying to get at is that if we have a system that the majority feels is fair and that the majority feels comfortable doing, using seatbelts, we all use seatbelts as a fair, reasonable law, then you will isolate the lawbreakers. Right now, we got minibuses that will pass you on the shoulder of the road on the left-hand side. And you see them doing it, and you say, well, what's the solution to this? Because these chaps, the faster they get to town to drop off the load, the faster they can go back where they came from and make another money. So we have this problem. And is the solution to say, oh, stiff penalties, lock them up? There must be penalties. It's driving dangerously. But you can do that till thy kingdom come, and they will still drive dangerously. They will still use the shoulder to get where they're going faster. And I think what I'm trying to get at is that if we are going to have a discussion as to solutions, it is excellent that you take personal responsibility when you get behind the wheel to drive carefully. I hope I do it, and I hope everyone in this forum does it. But most people don't. The minibus drivers go on the shoulder of the road because they got to make money. And it's not a solution to say, well, we must all take personal responsibility. We have to try to devise a structure where most people will happily obey the rules that are set out and traffic flows smoothly with the rules that are set out so that it is easier to grab the people who continue to break the rules and who are truly dangerous. So that's what I'm trying to get at, the structure that needs to exist.
If we were to chicken back with the comments, I think they're enjoying the discussion on the issue. But so Amit Dial said that the 4-lane Diamond to Timeri Road extension project will help reduce this problem, hopefully. Sand truck drivers keep speeding like life has no value. And Joey Rick said another factor that we are not taking seriously is the fitness of the vehicles. All those vehicles need to be certified yearly by mechanic shops in the country. And another interesting point, so Ravi Singh commented, and I think this is regard to what Ms. Khan said earlier about knowing about bribery going on. So he said, with all due respect, you personally know of bribery to obtain such a license, but what do you do about it? Did you contact anyone or report somebody? And he's trying to suggest that that's the way forward, that if you have a culture of bribery, you're not going to break the culture of bribery unless you have people who start to report that. So I was wondering, Ms. Khan, would you want to take the opportunity to address that? Or and Mr. Jonas, would you want to talk about what impact the 4-lane Diamond to Timeri Road extension might have or not?
If I could go first really quickly, as I said, there are instances where I know of. Do I have proof? No. Can I report it? No. So it's not a situation where I have all of the evidence and I'm going to go and I'll present everything. So, but I know for a fact. So you said, Mr. Singh, that I do, I respect what you're saying. Obviously, that is something that's going to help with corruption, but that's just, to give you an update on that.
Mr. Jonas, do you have anything to say about the 4-lane Diamond to Timeri Road extension and whether that would help or not?
We got a huge problem on the East Bank and a smaller problem, but a growing problem on the East Coast. And I think that it needs a holistic solution. I see some roads being built from one bottleneck to another bottleneck. And a lot of it is not going to work. There are growing population centers where large amounts of people move at two particular times during the day, in the morning going to work and in the evenings going home from work. And if you identify those population centers, Grove, Eccles, Diamond, you see at those locations serious traffic jams. The Harbor Bridge, serious traffic jams. And we have to find ways to allow people to bypass those traffic bottlenecks so that there is a smoother flow of traffic. A person who lives in Reed and Hoop and needs a load of sand, the load of sand got to come from the highway going towards Linden. It's got to pass Grove, where there's a huge population center. It's got to pass Diamond, where there's a growing commercial center. It's got to pass Eccles, where there's a big population center. It's got to reach the Harbor Bridge, where there's a huge bottleneck of people going into Republic Park and the bridge. Then it's got to cross that bridge, which may or may not be open, to get to Reed and Hoop over the river. Now, for each truck that is doing that, there is somebody who is inconvenienced. To solve that problem, because the same person from Reed and Hoop who might need sand that who's going to Mary Airport got to pass all of those same things, because there's one road and large population centers have evolved. We need a second bridge further up the Demerara River, further up, higher up the Demerara River, even than Grove, so that you don't use the Harbor Bridge at all. And the traffic that is going from across the river to the Tamari Airport or to Linden or anywhere up there to Grove does not use the Harbor Bridge, does not interfere with Eccles, does not interfere with Diamond, and therefore you have reduced traffic in those areas because people are able to bypass it using a bridge further up the river. If we just build more roads from point A to point B, or wider roads from point A to point B as we're doing, I don't think we're solving the problem. I must say that one idea that I have seen the administration running with that I think is a good one is a new route from Grove going along to connect to the East Bank, probably in the area of Enmore. I hope that's where it's connecting, because another large area of traffic congestion is when people are coming from Berbice or going to Berbice and need sand from Linden or going to the Tamari Airport and got to pass those same bottlenecks that I'm talking about that the sand truck has to pass going over the river. Now, if there is a road from the Grove area or higher up going straight to Enmore, the people who are going to Ogle, going to UG, going to Berbice will not pass those bottlenecks and have to drive through town like everybody else does. If you can reduce the volume of traffic at the bottlenecks, you will improve traffic flow. And that's what I'd like to see. I'm seeing too much of a widening of an existing road, which is unimaginative and of limited help.
All right. Thank you for that comment there, Mr. Jonas. Thank you, Tracey, and thank you, Rusat. So we would like to go right into our next discussion, which would be there was this murder that occurred in Region 2 on the Essequibo Coast on the 19th of February, where an 18-year-old housewife allegedly stabbed her husband to death. And she was later arrested, hauled before the court, and remanded to prison. Now, one of the things that I've noticed is that she's 18, right? One is that she's 18, and she was already a housewife. And, well, I forgot to mention that it was reported that it happened during an argument at her relative's place. So, we have, like, well, a month and finishes, definitely had another murder that happened the other day, where a man murdered his wife and slit his throat and allegedly consumed the poisonous substance, but he survived, right? He was remanded the other day to prison. We have a lot of these cases going on, and My question is, do you guys think enough is being done to um, address violence against men and women in Guyana and to reduce these tragic incidents from happening? Um, Mr. Jonas, would you like to begin?
Where do we learn to be violent? I think that's the big question. Where do we learn to be violent? And then what are the triggers for violence? And it's really difficult. We learn to be violent from our history, and it goes back to Ms. Khan, what we were talking about earlier. You see, if the rules, if we grow up in a system, in a society where we do not expect fairness, then we lose our dignity and our self-respect, and we lose our sense of entitlement to equality and justice as humans. I'll give you an example, and I'll start right at the beginning. There was a time in Guyana when slavery was legal, and it was against the law for a slave to run away. Now, think about that. Slavery is legal, and it is against the law for a slave to run away. Now, if we have blind obedience to laws that are unfair, and I'm sure you follow my train of thought, Ms. Khan, then slavery being legal and it being against the law for slaves to run away is something that we must all obey. How do you enforce that law? You can't enforce that law by persuading anybody that it's a fair law or it's a just law. So the way that you enforce that law is by the most harsh penalty for breaking the law. So if this time the slave runs away, you cut his hamstring. The next time he runs away, you cut off his hand to make an example to somebody else. And the third time he runs away, you hang him, you kill him, and you leave his body up for people to see. You're not doing it because it's right. And you're not doing it to inspire fairness and justice. You're doing it to terrorize, because terror is the only way that you can enforce an unfair situation. Fear is the only way to enforce an unfair situation. So fast forward to the 20th century, and we have this history, but we have a culture where our parents beat us for the smallest infraction, where men beat their women for the smallest bit of back talk, where in that ugly, horrible situation, men drink too much, women drink too much, women beat their children. There's no trust, there's no loyalty, there's no rock, there's no stability. And then take us forward to poverty, no jobs, poor education, and you got some insecure man who has grown up seeing daddy beat mommy, seeing mommy beat his siblings, believing this is the only way to empower himself and to establish that he is in a position of authority in his household. Frustrated because he might have a job, unable to express himself any other way because he has no education. And we got a hot mess going on in Guyana. And we have a growing disease of domestic violence, child abuse, that is expanding exponentially. And where's the solution? The solution can only be in education, in welfare, so that women with children are given money while their children are of school age, so that they have financial independence. And if they find themselves in a fix, like so many women find themselves, can't leave home because they're financially dependent, because the man is providing the money for the children and for them, scared to go anywhere. They need to have the financial independence and security that they can walk out anytime they want. And we need a welfare system for that. education so the children learn better. We need to educate our people more so that there is a stigma. How many of us are aware in the village that uncle somebody up the road beats his wife and nobody says anything, nobody does anything?
Yeah.
There's a lot to be done and it's a huge problem.
To piggyback off what Mr. Jonas just said, really good points. We learn abuse at home. That's where our minds are molded. I'm from Berbice. I'm a proud country girl, and I grew up in a abusive home. My father was abusive to my mother. I grew up seeing that being meted out to my mother, seeing my mother staying with 7 kids, like you said. What else was she going to do? She had no other way, no other help. My father was the breadwinner. Um, and there were so many years of my life too as a woman and an educated woman where, because what we're taught in the home is so powerful, that I thought that it was okay for a man to hit a woman, because that is what I grew up seeing, not just in my home, but around me. That is what was dominant. So it really does start at home. And I know also too, when men are abusing women, and I just want to say for the record, my father has turned his life around. I love my father to the ground that he walks on. I just want to put that out there. I don't want anyone trying to attack my father. But also these men, they need help, and I'm not saying to baby them, but just putting them, you go in front of the court, a man beats his wife, he gets charged, he might go to jail for a little bit, comes back home, him and the wife, they're back together. The cycle continues over and over and over again. The state needs to intervene to offer counseling as well, because a lot of the time a woman will leave only when she wants to leave. You're going to tell a woman to leave a man a million times. She's not going to leave that man. She's going to leave when she wants to leave. And so also I believe that counseling these men and also the women, to empower them to say that, this is not okay, but also providing the services, the resources, like you said, to say that, listen, we're going to also help you. We're not telling you that, oh, it's not okay, you should leave, but we don't have any other solutions for you. How are you going to provide for all of these kids that you have if you leave this man, when this man, even though he's abusive, he is providing for you? So also, like you said, financial independence, the men need to be educated, and women as well, to understand that it's not okay. And again, stiffer penalties, making an example of these men, that, and not just men, because it would be so unfair to just say, but of course we know that it's the majority. Men are abusing women, but men also are also being abused, a small amount, but also, making an example out of abusers as well, like you said.
One thing I'd add to that discussion, the incident Mr. Ramsaywack brought up with regards to the housewife who killed her husband, Esquiva, it was a teen wife. It was an 18-year-old and a 27-year-old man, and I don't know when they got married, but I'm going to presume it's not when she was 18 and he was 27. So even then, I think that it brings up a discussion about the age level at which young girls are entering these relationships, and numerous studies can show you as countries transition from developing to developed, the older that a woman is when she's entering into marriage, the less likely it will be that some of these things happen. So if you have a society where the girls are younger and are less mature and being forced into these situations, which can be very tragic situations, unfortunately, this can happen. So the level of maturity, I think, also needs to be taken into consideration. How do we build a society where you're not having an 18-year-old girl with a 27-year-old guy, and one ends up killing the other? But hopefully, as Guyana develops more, they're older and more mature when they enter into relationships, and that factor will not be potentially contributing to a violent relationship. Though obviously there are other factors as well within the society, and it's not just within Guyana. Also, Guyanese Americans, they come over here. I'm here to talk about a New York perspective. In New York, you do have a lot of Guyanese who are over here who end up having domestic violence in their relationships, and that's something that I, as a candidate, when I'm running in this community, we will be talking about and working together to try to address as one community, as one larger family, because it's something that we do need to root out of our culture as best as we could. Obviously, it's a very complicated situation. I was with Mr. Jonas talking about the situation, about this same issue at Miss Ramsaywack not that long ago, and one instance that comes to mind is there was that instance in Queens a few years back where a man killed his wife because he was jealous that she had a crush on the Bollywood star Hrithik Roshan, and you have so many nonsensical cases like that lead to these tragic, just tragic loss of life. I mean, the other situation Mr. Ramsaywack was talking about recently in Guyana where the man killed his wife, and he survived and he's out on and I think he's out now, right? So just time and time again you see situations like this, and it doesn't reflect good on us as a people and our culture. So we need discussions like these to help root it out and try to come to solutions. Just to incorporate some comments again, there's one comment, Ravi saying that it's an unfortunate cycle. He agrees 100% with Tracey that education and mental health is key. Mohammed Asghar, very sad. My deepest sympathy and sincere condolences, to individuals who lose their life due to these types of incidents. Another comment said that the law enforcement agencies have failed miserably in the country. I don't think these comments allow for as much discussion as the earlier ones, but just thought it would be good to share, especially for those watching, that send the comments and we'll try to include it in the discussion as much as possible. Oh, another one, my condolences to the family where we have obviously drunk people. The alcohol being involved is another factor in some instances.
Thank you, Rusat. No, well, I'm a journalist as well, right? And most of these cases, or most of these victims, when you look at it, are victims that were living in deep poverty. Now, the question I want to ask, right? Tracy, I'll begin with you. Do you think poverty also plays a role in this?
Could you repeat if I believe?
Pardon me?
Could you please repeat if I believe?
Sure. So I was saying, right? Most of the research that I've done, I found that a lot of these victims are victims who are living in deep poverty, right? In Guyana here. And what the question that I want to ask is, do you also think poverty plays a role? Because with the recent murder that we had, which took place at Hope Estate on March 6th on the east coast of Neermala, right? This woman, this victim here, she wanted to leave an abusive relationship, and she was also not happy with the condition that she was living in. She was living in poverty, right? And she wanted to get out for a better life. Not only that, is that she went and she tried to leave. When she tried to leave, she showed up with a sibling, and the guy not only attacked her, he also attacked her sister. And I mean, when you do look at it and you dig deeper into these stories, you get to find certain information where you would learn that, okay, he wanted to leave because of this reason and that reason. And so my question is, do you also think poverty play a big role in this?
100%. Perhaps apart from, growing up in a home that it's something that you see, like our culture, poverty is one of probably the biggest factor to abuse, because a lot of the times, like you said, there are women who have had enough and they want to, but they've never worked a day in their life. All they know is they got married when they were young. This man works, he is the breadwinner. They are stay at home, a housewife, they cook, they clean. They don't have that confidence to say, I can go out there and I can do something and I can make something of my life, because they don't have the skills. So poverty 100% plays a major factor. So like Mr. Jonas said, he touched on it, where he said that, there needs to be resources and facilities, more facilities. I know that there are. Um, and also to publicize them even more, to let women know, because you would be surprised how many women they don't know of the current resources that are available to them, that can help them to get out of the situation, make something of themselves, provide for their children without a man. So I think they need to be educated as well too, that yes, there are resources. And then, the authorities, they continue to look at other countries, what they're doing, how they're helping domestic violence abusers, and just take pages out of the handbooks from here to help the women. And we have to empower the women, empower them, and build their confidence, because like I am a firm believer in everything starts in your head. Like once you can win things mentally, and once you have that confidence to say that I can win, you will win. So when you empower women, you build their self-esteem, then you provide the resources that they need, that they can go out and they can provide for themselves. 100%, they're gonna do it. And there, like you said, there are many cases where the women, they wanted to leave, but they felt as if they had nowhere to go, or perhaps they do have places to go, but they have no protection against the man, because he would show up at their mother's house or wherever they are and abuse them, attack them, and things have escalated. Women have died as a result. They've left, they've walked out, and they were attacked. So empower them, build their confidence, build their self-esteem, empower them, provide the resources for them, and also get protection for the women.
Thank you, Tracy. Mr. Jonas, I have a question for you. With this particular case here, with this woman that was murdered the other day on March 6th by her husband, right? I'm not sure if you saw the video circulating on Facebook where the police showed up after they were called. When they showed up, there was no ambulance, and it's like the police showed up on the pier. There were like two police officers there, three, I believe, and they were calling persons to assist them. Now, this is a crime scene. The woman is lying there on the ground. The guy is sitting not too far from her. Her sister is there. The police is there. We didn't have an ambulance here to place this woman and take her to the hospital. We had to transport her to the hospital in a police vehicle. I didn't notice any emergency medical technicians in that video here as well, because we saw, so when they picked her up, put her in the vehicle and took her to the hospital. Mr. Jonas, what are your views on that particular part there, where there was no ambulance and then the police showed up, well, I would say unprepared to deal with the situation because there wasn't enough officers there present, because they were requesting the help from the persons who were standing around looking on. What are your views on that?
Okay, so you've gone from a discussion on what causes domestic violence and what measures need to be taken to prevent it, to looking at the capacity of police response to crime. It's two different subjects, if you'll forgive me for pointing that out. We are a very third world country. We're no longer next poorest to Haiti. I think there's one other poorer than us. But if we want to have a discussion on police capacity and infrastructural capacity to deal administratively with detective work, with criminal investigation, with medical care in emergency situations, that's a big topic. Now, insofar as police capacity goes, I'll tell you something. If you want to be a policeman in Canada, you need to have a degree before they let you into the academy. Can you imagine the quality of police that they have, even at the inspector level, detective level, interaction with the public, where we are speaking of someone who is educated at a tertiary level and therefore has the analytical ability, has the experience, has the academic knowledge of the law, of legal issues, of how to conduct himself. Um, the interaction with the police has to be completely different. And the ability of the police, the capacity of the police to deal with situations, both in terms of their training, but also in terms of their being socially and academically equipped to handle situations, has to be totally different from the situation in Guyana, where I think the requirement is a sound primary education. So, if we're going to have a talk about capacity, a lot more does need to be done. But I think the larger issue really is, what measures can we take to reduce this disease that's so rampant in our society? And I think that's where we need to focus, because by the time you have someone lying down in a bloody yard, breathing their last breaths, it's really too late already.
I'll ask one question based on the comments. The comments coming in. Well, one comment said that they really do need to bring back hanging in the streets for those who really commit these crimes. So obviously, we're not suggesting bringing back hanging in the streets, but relating to an earlier point that was being made about deterrence in terms of strong punishment, do you think that targeting these crimes with death penalty or something along those lines, we're not saying hanging in the streets, but some form of death penalty, do you think that deterrence would work, or not have that much of an impact? Ms. Jonas, Ms. Khan, yeah.
Maybe it will work. It will deter people from committing these heinous crimes. But I personally, I don't believe in that. And this is something that the UN, they're working to abolish. So many countries have done it. And I know, thankfully, Guyana has not, even though it's still a law, Guyana has not enforced it. So again, personally, I don't believe in it.
Mr. Jonas, do you think the death penalty would work as a deterrent?
Well, I just gave you a speech about where we get our culture of violence from. So that person is advocating more violence. And as I pointed out, at the time when crime was at its worst in England, they were hanging 14-year-olds for stealing 2 loaves of bread. Right now, the death penalty is abolished throughout Europe, Western Europe, and crime is at the lowest it has ever been. They're closing prisons in Sweden because they don't have enough prisoners to fill the prisons. There's no death penalty there. So if we have examples of countries where crime is at an all-time low, violent crime at an all-time low, and we want to start hanging people, I think we've missed the boat. We've missed the larger point of what we really want out of our society and what we expect in terms of security and happiness living in our society.
Okay.
And relating to a point that Mr. Jonas said, which is also being referenced in the comments, I can just say from a New York perspective, the requirement up to just a few years ago for cops used to be high school diploma, but now it has changed. It changed back a few years ago from high school diploma to 2 years of college education. So at least 2 years of college education is required now for cops in New York.
Thank you, Rusat. Tracey, I know you have to take your leave soon. Before you go, I want to play. I'll ask Evan to play this recording of an election sharing his views on cost of living, and maybe you can share your views just after that before you go. Devin, over to you.
The cost of living in the country right now. Things here so hard, it's even hard for you to keep your own hygiene. A pack of soap powder now is almost $1,000. Milk, $1,000. If you working for $4,000 salary, what really you doing at the end of the week? You can't even afford to pay bill, rent, nothing. What exactly you doing? You working for live? And this is all you can see. If something wrong with you today, tomorrow you can't go to the pharmacy and buy nothing. What, let's go to the church and hospital. You're going along there for lie down and dead. Is all you could do? It's like the country getting rich, but the people getting poorer. You're providing land, people can't even afford to see for buy a land. What am I really doing this place? I can't really understand.
Yes, Tracey. What are your views on that comment here?
Honestly, my heart goes out to I want to say the ordinary man, because I know that the cost of living has gone up throughout the world. But then, when we look at what's happening in Guyana, inflation is hitting everyone and everything. It's real. But when you look at what's going on in Guyana, the cost of living is going up, but the salary, every year the government, they would give like a certain percentage, but like they need to be realistic. And then we have all of this, the oil and so many opportunities. And it's amazing when you're building all of these roads, and we have all these fancy buildings and hotels and all these amazing things happening. But then what's happening to the ordinary man? So, the resources needs to be triggered down to the ordinary man. People are not going to be, they don't really care that you're building all these roads and these bridges and these highways and all of that when they are struggling to put food on the table. A mother or a cleaner who is working, I don't know, 60,000 if that much, and has 4 or 5 kids, how is she going to be able to provide basic, I'm not talking about even clothing, I'm speaking just about food. How is she going to be able to provide for her kids? And I know there are so many people who are struggling so much because they can't put something that is a necessity, food, on the table. So that's something that the authorities, they need to look into, to ensure that the oil riches, it's being trickled down to the ordinary man, to ensure that they can have a decent life. So that's my thoughts on that, on the situation with the cost of living.
All right, thank you, Tracy. Mr. Jonas, over to you.
And
What are your
my apologies, here is
Go
where I'll
ahead.
take my leave. It was such a pleasure being on the panel. I appreciate you all, and thank you for having me.
Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Tracy. Thank you.
Have a
Bye. Mr. Jonas, what are your views on that comment here? The views shared by the electrician, the comments that he made on cost of living.
Good. Solutions. We know cost of living has gone up. We know the country's got more money. Everybody can complain. And it's not a solution to say, oh, the money's got to trickle down. That's a hope. That's a pipe dream. That's not a solution. A solution is a plan of action. Now, I've said this repeatedly, and I really hope that it starts resonating and hitting home. It really is time to stop just this single edge of criticizing and complaining and start really thinking outside the box about solutions that are applicable for us. Now, how do you help the people at the bottom? A couple things we're seeing. First of all, the people who are educated, the accountants, the engineers, the chemists, the electrical engineers, they're finding jobs. In fact, they are being drawn into the oil and gas industry, and they are earning well. So first, you got to identify the people who have been left out of the loop, and that's the uneducated. The welders, the truck drivers, the people who are who have a trade, they're doing quite well. So you got to look at the people who are out of the loop, and it's the uneducated, it's the elderly, it's still in the rural areas, the women. So you got to focus your attention on them, and you got to figure out how to make money to have available in the government coffers, and then how to make that money as a system available to these people. And I'm not talking cash handouts. I'm not talking government ministers going out and giving white envelopes in the rural areas. That is politics. I'm talking about a real welfare system. How do we do it? First of all, we gotta increase the revenue that NIS gets. So people should be paying NIS for longer. It shouldn't stop at 50 and 55. It should be going up to 60 and 65. The net that NIS costs in national insurance needs to be wider. There are a lot of people that aren't paying. It needs to be strict regulation and strict rules and enforcement against employers who are employing people and not declaring them to pay the NIS. The government needs to be taking some oil and gas money and putting it into NIS, so that NIS needs to be a cash heavy institution. It needs to have money. And that money needs to go to be available for women who have school age children. They need to get every quarter, they need to get a sum of money for each child they have while that child is school age, so that they have this independence, and whatever money is coming into the home can be spent for maintaining the home because the child is cared for. There needs to be a more holistic education, so the children are fed in schools. Your parents know that the children will be cared for in schools, and therefore that particular expense and that particular distraction from your own professional, from your own work, because if you got to look after your child, you can't work. You have an easier go of it. There needs to be a different tax level for Guyanese and for non-Guyanese. We have lots of non-Guyanese coming in. They need to be paying a lot of money for their visas, and they need to be paying higher income tax, so that that disparity can be spent in subsidizing Guyanese expenses, and Guyanese need to pay less income tax, especially at the bottom, so that the money that they earn, that little bit of money they earn, and if you're earning 100,000, you should not be paying $8,000 of that in income tax. So a new tax regime, preferential for Guyanese, a better welfare system for mothers with school age children, an unemployment benefit arrangement, and a way to get more money into NIS to fund these things. That's the way to go. So you're providing more money for the people at the bottom, but doing it in a systematic way so that everybody sees what's happening and everybody knows what the rules are.
Mr. Jonas, so when I heard you speak just now, that was a very well thought out, policy focused solution to this issue. Now, for far too long, when you talk about Guyanese politics, it's based more on, unfortunately, racial divides in the two historic parties rather than policy discussion and. As you're very famous for, I know your third party. Do you think that you have the cost of living issue now? Do you think that it presents an opportunity to refocus the Guyanese political discussion on more of a policy focused debate rather than the historic racial divide and that voting pattern?
That's an interesting question, and it's something I've been chewing on myself. You see, we have an interesting situation in Guyana. I firmly believe that the cycle of poverty benefits the two large parties. You see, we talk about, and you asked the interesting question, Mr. Ramsaywack, whether domestic violence is a characteristic of the poor rather than the wealthy. And I think we can agree you see more domestic violence in the poorer community. But what else do you see more of in the poorer community? You see less education, you see more alcohol abuse. You also, in the rural areas, in those areas, see much more clearly delineated ethnic voting patterns. When you rub shoulders with a professional, accountant, lawyer, doctor, engineer, he is rubbing shoulders with people who don't look like him. He is interacting, and the exposure that that person has is much wider, and that person has different interests at heart. He is more invested in why is this government minister getting a duty-free concession to drive his Prado and I can only afford a 1500cc car. He's more interested in his economic security and in the education of his children. That person is more likely to vote policy. And therefore, it is in the interest of those two ethnic parties to keep the rural people poor, to keep them uneducated. It's an interesting cycle that we have. The threat to ethnic politics is thinking people. So you have this tug of war because everybody's upwardly mobile. Everybody wants to do better. Everybody wants to send their children to private school to make more money to do better. But if people become more affluent, they become more demanding and they become more critical of their leaders in terms of real policy. And that's a threat. So how do you get around that? I really do believe that as Guyana becomes more affluent, there will be more people who are voting and thinking in terms of policy and in terms of real analysis rather than blind loyalty. And I think that we will see that turning point sooner or later.
All right, thank you. Rusat, I know you are aware of a comment that was made by Mayor Eric Adams on Tuesday, February 8th, where he decried the separation of church and state. I know you're familiar with the comment and much more on that. So I'll hand it over to you for us to have a discussion on that.
Thank you. I believe Devin has the clip of the comments. So for those in the audience who may not have heard it, Devin, if you have it.
The synagogue is the gym. The church is the gym. The Sikh temple is the gym. The mosque is the gym. You are there for training. You're not there to leave your best worship in the gym. Because if we are bringing our best fight in the ring, we would not have homeless in this city. We would not have a crisis of domestic violence. We would not have children, because when we took prayers out of schools, guns came into schools. So the reflection point of today, when we do an analysis of these and you coming together, is to state, are we leaving our best fight in the gym? Don't tell me about no separation of church and state. State is the body, church is the heart. You take the heart out of the body dies. I can't separate my belief because I'm an elected official. When I walk with God.
So I think so. Mayor Adams' comments obviously led to a lot of controversy in the city. The spirit of the comments is about faith and religious institutions in our life. As you mentioned, synagogue, or it could be temple or church or whatever it is for you, and religious values, conservative values, whatever you want to call it. But I think where he lost a lot of people was when he said the phrase separation of church and state and trying to decry that. I think Mayor Adams had a fundamental misunderstanding of what is historically meant by separation of church and state in this country. The reason that you have a First Amendment that's written as it is, protecting freedom of religion and delineating a separation of church and state, is not that you don't want religion in someone's life. It's that you don't want a state religion. You understand that the American colonists broke away from England at a time where you had a Church of England, the Anglican Church, that governed how things were run in England. That's why you had pilgrims escape from religious persecution in England coming to the United States. So you have the famous Mayflower voyage and the setting up of the Plymouth colony. So within the history of the United States, the reason you have separation of church and state is so that you don't have one church by the state that governs life. That was the case in 1700s in England, in France, as Mr. Jonas could talk about it as well. You have the Catholic Church in continental Europe, the Anglican Church in England. The U.S. broke away from that. You have freedom of religion where you could celebrate whatever religion you want, but that's not to say that the way the First Amendment is, the way the Constitution is, the way this country is founded, is that you don't have religion in your life. At the end, it protects freedom of religion. The Declaration of Independence says, all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's why President Dwight Eisenhower, as recently as the 1950s, was saying that, to believe in American values, it requires a belief in God. He said, I don't care what God it is, but it requires a belief in a Creator that endowed you with certain unalienable rights. So belief in that value has always been part of American history, the American way, American life. I think what Mary Adams is getting at, where he said, we took prayers out of the schools and guns came in the schools, or something along those lines. I think what he's getting at is that in public life, over the past few decades, we've had less religious values, less conservative values in public life, and that's coincided with an increase in violence and some very terrible activities. And I believe what Mary Adams is trying to get at, which is something I would agree with, is that if we were to emphasize more about religious values, family values, conservative values, maybe we wouldn't have the problems that we're having in society as much or to the same degree we are right now. And that's, for example, one of the reasons that I'm running because our community is a conservative community. We're socially conservative when it comes to many things, but at the same time, we're getting represented by politicians who are not in line with those values, who go way out of line when it comes to the social issues. Mayor Adams is in a unique position where he is a Democrat, but he tries to try to appear moderate or even conservative at times on certain issues. But he often talks the talk more than walking the walk. Like, his rhetoric will be conservative, but his policies are not. When it comes to, for example, the crime issue as well, which we're talking about in Guyana, but it's huge in New York. Mayor Adams, he talks a good game on crime. He's a former cop. He uses that background, but crime is up under Mayor Adams. The perception of public safety is the worst it's been in decades, and that is under his watch. So when it comes to these issues, and even relates to what Mr. Jonas said about having a policy-focused discussion and breaking away from certain voting patterns, many people in this city, this is a majority Democrat city, just vote Democrat all the time. But over time, what's happened is we're breaking away from it, because you're seeing, whether it's the cost of living, whether it's crime in the city, it's pushing people away from the Democrats. The New York Times recently did an article where they mentioned the Indo-Caribbean community in Richmond Hill, 21% increase in voting for Republicans now, because it's a protest vote against how Democrats have failed in their leadership of the city. And that's why I see a prime opportunity to run as a Republican now, that there is a growing movement of backlash against the Democrats. And if we look at other issues that affect it, obviously, a lot of people know me here from Globespan and previous appearances. The way that Democrats handled some issues, like, for example, Letitia James and what she said last year, that led to Michael Henry having a moment among Guyanese based on what was said in that Attorney General's race. That's another reason you see some backlash against Democrats in the Guyanese community. But getting back on topic to what Mayor Adams said, I think a lot of Guyanese or people in the audience may agree with the spirit that we need to emphasize more conservative values. But what he said specifically about church and state led to controversy, because he was conflating two separate things. We can believe in conservative values, believe religious values, but that doesn't mean that you talk about doing away with separation of church and state. That's to protect against having government sanction one specific religion. That's against saying America is a Christian country or a Catholic country or a Jewish country or whatever. The reason we have separation of church and state is to allow for more freedom of religion, not less.
Thank you, Rusat. Mr. Jonas, would you like to add a comment to that?
Not sure I agree with you there, Oman. Eisenhower says, yes, of course, we're designed under a God. But I think that you equally have to acknowledge a willingness to fight for someone's right to be atheist or agnostic.
No, I fight for the right to be atheist or agnostic as well. If that didn't come across in the comment, if you believe in no God as well, that is protected under the First Amendment. Where if you believe in any religion or no religion at all, that's why we have a First Amendment.
And therefore, I would argue against a suggestion that the state should be structured as invoking any God, even if it is a religious neutral God. So one nation under God, all of us united under one creator. That presupposes beliefs which people must be free to reject. And I myself believe that the division, the separation of the state from the church must be absolute. In fact, I'll give you an example. Marriage. Now, people make a big to-do about marriage. The Muslims believe that if you have to, it's not the best case, but you may have more than one wife. Paul persuaded the Christians that you should only have one, that you shouldn't get married, but if you have to marry, you must only marry once. Then you've got the common law marriage, you've got same-sex marriage, and all of those problems would be solved completely if the church was separated completely from the state. Because we've had a conflation of the church and state, so that man and woman get married, they go to church, but then they also go to the post office and sign a piece of paper legitimizing the thing and giving it legal recognition. Because it is conflated, suddenly you got all kinds of mix up. If two people, two consenting adults, could agree to enter a legal relationship where they share custody of whatever children they either have naturally or adopt, where they agree to rights of inheritance, rights of sharing property, rights of support and maintenance. If that is a purely legal arrangement, then suddenly it's nobody's business if I go to the masjid and I marry twice, or if I go to the church and marry once, or if I go to another church that allows me to marry a man and I do that, because that separates the religion from the state. And it is the failure to separate religion from state which gives us a lot of problems. So I would advocate for a complete separation, because in the public schools in Guyana, up to the other day, I think they're still doing it in the public schools at primary school. You stand up and pray, say an Our Father before classes start. I object to that. My family is Christian. I don't object to it because I'm not Christian. I object to it because if you're Hindu, you mustn't have to do that, because it mustn't be in the school. So yeah, I would separate it completely.
Well, I'd say with regards to what Mayor Adams was saying, to connect it back to that, like the moment in time that he's talking about is that there was a moment where the Supreme Court struck down in the U.S. that you cannot have prayer in public schools because of that specific reason. So, I mean, there is a very strict separation of church and state in the U.S. You know, obviously, as you're saying, issues like marriage, it can get a bit muddled there, as you're saying that, you know, you have religious marriage, but it has to be legalized or legally recognized by the state too. Another, so I understand the point you're saying, but with regards to Mayor Adams, I think that, you know, he got off track with like talking about separation of church and state, when at the end of the First Amendment protects you. If you want to believe in religion, if you don't want to believe in religion, it's protected under the First Amendment. I think he went.
I agree.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Now, before we close, I would like us to take a look at a comment which was made by one of the Working People Alliance member, Rhonda Lane. Now, I'll ask Seven to play that video, and we'll take a look at it, and then go into the comments. After that, we'll close.
Who suddenly getting land? Many of them came from the slums of India, and if you look at the amount of persons in India, 1.something billion to that little landmass, you understand what is going on in India. They lived in pipes, they live in all the deplorable places, and the few high ones in the high caste, they live in the top places like Delhi and the big high Punjab province and that place. That is only place for the elite.
Mr. Jonas, what are your views on that particular comment that was made by Ms. Lane?
What are my views on racism? It's a wonderful thing, eh? Um, you know what's nice about the New World? About the fact that our country is only 50 years old and that every last one of us started out at the bottom. Because I started out as a slave, and my friend Ramgopal there started out as an indentured servant. And what was nice about that is that unlike England, where the classes evolved over centuries, in Guyana, people were able to rise in a relatively short space of time by dint of ability and determination. So the businessmen that we have, the wealthy that we have, are people who pull themselves up by their own bootstraps. And when I listened to that garbage that that lady was talking, I wonder if she doesn't realize that if Tulsi Prasad, Rai Bipat, Gafur, Bihari, if these folk came out from such dire situations, dire circumstances, and by dint of their own efforts rose to the positions that they are in now, power to them. What a remarkable story that is. And if she hasn't been able to do it, she got to ask herself some questions. I myself am asking myself some questions. But in this country, we need to reject racism loudly. And I don't need to say anything more about that.
I mean, obviously, I'm here to talk more about the New York issues, but with regard to what was said, um, obviously, we denounce racism in any way, shape, or form. And I believe that the WPA, when it was first founded, was supposed to be something Walter Rodney wanted it to be across racial lines and ethnic lines, and to be more on class differences. So I would. And Mr. Jonas and I were talking about that earlier on a different point, but I would suggest maybe look back what it was initially supposed to be.
All right, thank you both. Now, I would like to ask Mr. Timothy Jonas, do you have any closing comments? And Rusat, do you also have any closing comments? Mr. Jonas?
I must say, Ms. Ramsaywack, we went all around the block tonight. We talked about crime, we talked about domestic violence, we went to police response, we went to racism, we talked about separation of church and state. Each of those is a full subject, a full conversation worthy of direct and isolated attention. So I think we need to have a bit more focus. But I enjoyed the conversation and I enjoyed Mr. Ramgopal's contributions. I'm sorry Ms. Khan left. Thank you very much for having me. It was a good conversation.
Thank you. Rusat, closing comments?
Thank you once again for having me on. It's always a pleasure to be in Globespan, also to share a stage with Mr. Jonas. It's always entertaining. Now, I just want to say with regards to the audience, I've always appreciated being on Globespan. Mr. Noar Singh and Devin have always been some of the kindest people. And as was said, I'm now running for office locally here in New York. So obviously those who recognize me from Globespan over the years, I look forward to your support over the next few months. And the question was asked earlier, like to speak about, inform people about the election. The way the election is going to go is right now the parties are in their nominating process. The Democrat incumbent is going to be the Democrat nominee. I'm running for the Republican nomination, so I'm getting signatures now to be on the ballot. There's a two-party system. Only two parties have direct ballot access. Hopefully I will get those signatures and be on the ballot. So you may see me around the little Guyana area collecting signatures over the next few days and weeks. And hopefully if I make it on the ballot, will be the Republican nominee, and we'll have a general election in November. I think the community has been starved of proper competitive general elections with regards to their local representatives for a long time. Normally, people just run a Democrat primary, and the Democrats have their primary in June or whatever, and it just settled there, and they never have a proper competitive general election. I think it'll be good for this community to have that option at the general election. I will present a proper option for them to vote for. I look forward to support of anyone willing to offer. And even if you're not willing to offer, I'll hear your feedback as well and become a better candidate based on it. But thank you to everyone. And for those who want to follow the campaign, there's an Instagram page, Facebook as well. The Facebook just started today, so we could use all the followers we get. Rusat Ramgopal on Facebook, Rusat for New York on Instagram, and also email rusatfornewyork at gmail.com. So I hope to have people follow the campaign as it goes along. I think it'll be very exciting, not just for me, but for our community. At the end of the day, that's what it's for. Those who know me know I have a legal education. If I wanted to, I could just go be a lawyer and do my own thing. But I wanted to at least try to do something for my community that I see underrepresented and underserved, and at least try my hat in the ring. Fortune favors the brave, so let's hope it all works out for us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thanks for having me on again.
Thank you so much, Rusat, and we want to wish you the very best again with your campaign. I would like to thank also both of you for always agreeing to be a part of our programs, to be a part of the discussions. Thank you guys so much for that. I really appreciate it, and I really enjoyed comments too, and if you shared, I must say. I would like to thank all our viewers for tuning in, and I would also like to thank Mr. Nohar Singh for making this program possible, and our technical operator, Devin Disu. Thank you all so much, and do take care until next time.